Forget everything you think you know about luxury tax havens. Forget the picture-perfect beaches that belong on a postcard. Forget familiar names like Switzerland and Dubai. Because for years, a small island in the Mediterranean has been quietly building an entirely different kind of power. From above, Cyprus looks like a holiday paradise. Turquoise waters, golden sunshine, luxury marinas stretching along the coastline. But behind that peaceful scenery lies a world few people have ever seen. A world of shell companies, cross-border financial flows worth billions of dollars, highly secured data centers, and a financial and technological ecosystem designed to serve the wealthiest individuals on the planet. This is no longer just an island. It has become a digital fortress, a place where strategic geography, unique legal frameworks, and cutting-edge infrastructure combine to create one of the most discrete hubs of global wealth. But the real question is this: how did a nation of fewer than 1.5 million people become a magnet for international billionaires, technology firms, and massive flows of capital from around the world? And perhaps even more surprising, behind the polished image of prosperity lies a story filled with risks, controversies, and geopolitical competition that much of the world has barely noticed. To understand how Cyprus became a hidden center of global technology and offshore wealth, we have to begin with something deceptively simple: its location on the map. And that is only the beginning. Everything started with an advantage that no country can manufacture for itself: geography. Positioned on the eastern edge of the European Union, Cyprus sits only a few hours from the Middle East. On a map, the island appears far too small to wield significant influence. But in the worlds of finance, technology, and data, influence is not measured by land area. It is measured by the ability to connect centers of power. And that is exactly what Cyprus has done. While many countries must choose between access to European markets or Middle Eastern capital, Cyprus stands at the intersection of both. Over time, the island evolved into a bridge between Europe's strict regulatory framework and the vast pools of investment capital flowing from the Middle East, Asia, and beyond. But here's what makes the story remarkable. This was not always Cyprus's role. For decades, the island's economy was built primarily on tourism. Beach resorts, hospitality services, and international visitors served as its most important engines of growth. Then the world began to change. As data became an asset as valuable as oil, and as technology companies grew increasingly concerned about where their information was stored, an entirely new race emerged: the race for data sovereignty. Instead of selling sunshine and beaches, Cyprus began offering something far more valuable: legal stability, global connectivity, and a secure environment capable of housing the most critical data of multinational corporations. Gradually, hotels stopped being the only symbol of the island's economy. Highly protected data centers began to rise. International technology companies arrived, and Cyprus quietly transformed itself from a tourist destination into a digital fortress on the front line of the Mediterranean. But the true foundation of this transformation lies beneath the sea, hidden from view, in a place that most of the world never sees. Beneath the turquoise waters of the eastern Mediterranean lies a vast network of submarine fiber optic cables, carrying data between Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and Africa every second. These are the arteries of the modern digital economy. Every financial transaction, every automated trade, every artificial intelligence model processing billions of parameters. All of them depend on the speed of data transmission. And in this world, being slower by a fraction of a second can sometimes mean losing millions of dollars. That is precisely why Cyprus occupies such a valuable position. Strategic cable routes passing through the region have transformed the island into a low-latency gateway connecting some of the world's largest economic centers. For high-frequency trading firms, cloud computing providers, and AI systems that rely on real-time processing, every millisecond matters. And that is when Cyprus stopped being merely an island. It became a crossroads of the global digital economy, a place where data, money, and power converge in silence. But when a nation begins to host some of the world's most critical streams of information, the question is no longer how much money it can generate. The question becomes, who is truly in control of what is stored inside these digital fortresses? If the undersea cables are the nervous system of this digital fortress, then the financial system is the heart pumping lifeblood through it. Because data may attract technology companies, but keeping them there requires something else: money, and perhaps more importantly, a way to keep that money working efficiently. For decades, when people thought of destinations favored by the global ultra-wealthy, they imagined secretive tax havens filled with hidden bank accounts shielded from the outside world. But that model is gradually disappearing. International regulations are becoming stricter. cross-border financial reporting has become increasingly transparent, and governments are far less willing to tolerate the financial shadows that once existed beyond public scrutiny. What is remarkable is that Cyprus did not try to resist this trend. It adapted to it. Rather than creating a secret haven outside the system, the island chose a far more sophisticated strategy: to become part of the system, while still maintaining a significant competitive advantage. That is why many experts argue that the modern version of a tax haven is no longer a place where wealth is hidden. It is a place where wealth is optimized legally and efficiently. And one of the most powerful tools Cyprus has developed lies in the field of intellectual property. In the industrial economy, value was concentrated in factories. In the digital economy, value resides in intangible assets: software, algorithms, patents, source code, artificial intelligence models. In other words, intellectual property. Recognizing this shift, Cyprus created a specialized framework designed for the asset class that increasingly defines the 21st century: the IP box regime. Under this framework, qualifying income derived from intellectual property can benefit from exceptionally favorable effective tax treatment, making the island an attractive destination for technology companies, software developers, and owners of digital assets operating on a global scale. And that is only the first layer of the story, because corporations can always relocate assets. But moving people is far more difficult, especially founders, the individuals who create value in the first place. That is where another policy begins to play a crucial role: the non-domicile regime. At first glance, the term sounds technical, bureaucratic, and unremarkable, yet its impact is enormous. For many international entrepreneurs, investors, and technology founders, it represents a direct invitation from a nation competing to attract the world's wealth creators. A simple proposition: bring your business here, live here. And for years, certain categories of investment income, including dividends and interest, may qualify for significant tax advantages. For individuals managing portfolios worth tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars, the difference can translate into enormous sums every year. What is happening in Cyprus, therefore, is not merely a competition over tax rates. It is a competition for talent, a competition for founders, for innovators, for the people who control technology, data, and capital, the kind of individuals who can relocate an entire business ecosystem simply by choosing where to live. And as more of them arrived on the island, a new question began to emerge: if Cyprus has become a sanctuary for intellectual property, digital infrastructure, and global wealth, what is actually happening behind the walls of the data centers they are building? Because the most valuable assets of the modern age are no longer stored inside bank vaults. They are stored inside servers operating around the clock. If you want to see the future Cyprus is building, you do not need to enter a data center. Just look at the skyline of Limassol. For decades, this coastal city was known as a typical Mediterranean resort destination: blue seas, hotels, yachts, waterfront cafes. But then something unusual began to happen. The newcomers were not arriving for summer vacations. They arrived carrying laptops, servers, investment capital, and technology ideas worth billions of dollars. Year after year, the skyline of Limassol began to change. Beach resorts gradually started sharing space with modern glass towers. Smart buildings rose beside luxury marinas. By day, they reflected the Mediterranean sun. By night, they glowed like command centers for an entirely new economy. This was no longer the tourist city visitors once knew. It was a city being reprogrammed. And the people driving that transformation came from every corner of the world: software engineers from Eastern Europe, cybersecurity specialists, blockchain developers, technology entrepreneurs from Israel, Europe, and other innovation hubs. They were not simply moving their jobs to Limassol. They were bringing their futures with them. They moved their entire lives here. But what makes this story remarkable is that these people did not arrive by accident. They were drawn by a strategy designed with extraordinary intention. While many countries compete through subsidies or lower tax rates, Cyprus focused on something technology companies truly need: people. A company can build an office in a matter of months, but building a world-class engineering team can take years. Recognizing this, the government began implementing policies aimed at shortening the distance between global talent and the local market. Procedures for technology professionals were streamlined. Processing times were accelerated. International companies gained greater flexibility to recruit skilled workers from around the world. At first glance, these may seem like administrative changes. In reality, they triggered a powerful chain reaction. When a major technology company relocates, engineers follow. When engineers arrive, investors begin paying attention. When investors arrive, new startups are founded. A self-reinforcing cycle begins to emerge. And that is when Limassol transformed from a coastal city into a genuine innovation ecosystem. But the transformation did not stop there. Because just as remote work exploded across the world, Cyprus recognized another opportunity. An opportunity even larger than the first. If companies no longer required employees to sit in the same office, why not turn the entire island into an office? That idea became the foundation for an expanding network of programs aimed at remote workers and digital nomads. Instead of attracting only businesses, Cyprus began attracting individuals, blockchain developers, founders of decentralized finance ventures, artificial intelligence engineers capable of working from anywhere on Earth. In the summer, they were in Limassol. In the winter, they were still in Limassol. And that created something few emerging technology hubs ever achieve. A year-round innovation community. Ideas exchanged in cafes. Projects conceived along the waterfront. Investment deals signed in co-working spaces overlooking the sea. Gradually, the island became more than a corporate destination. It became a living laboratory, a place where decentralized finance, blockchain infrastructure, and next-generation technologies could be tested in real time. But the more technology companies arrived, the more data accumulated. And as data became the most valuable resource of the digital economy, Limassol began attracting more than founders and engineers. It started attracting another force entirely. The corporations building vast data fortresses behind the scenes. And those facilities represent the most valuable layer of the story. Yet data is not the only asset being protected on this island. Money is as well. And when the sums become large enough, privacy is no longer a luxury. It becomes infrastructure. That is why, in recent years, an entirely new layer of architecture has emerged across Cyprus. At first glance, these developments appear to be little more than modern marinas, luxury residential districts, glass towers overlooking the Mediterranean. Everything resembles an upscale resort built for the global elite. But the reality is far more complex. Because the people purchasing these properties are not merely searching for comfort. They are searching for protection. Entrepreneurs who own billion-dollar companies. Technology founders who have recently sold their businesses. Investors responsible for managing enormous pools of capital. Individuals whose wealth has reached a level where security, discretion, and stability become strategic necessities rather than lifestyle preferences. And as more of them arrived, Cyprus began evolving into something few places have ever managed to become. Not simply a destination for wealth, but a platform designed to preserve it. A place where financial infrastructure, legal frameworks, digital networks, and physical security increasingly work together as a single system. Yet that raises another question. If so much wealth, data, and influence are flowing toward one small island, who else is paying attention? Because wherever strategic assets accumulate, geopolitical interests are never far behind. Families responsible for managing wealth accumulated across generations. For them, privacy is not simply about avoiding attention. It is a form of risk management. As a result, gated communities, multi-layered access controls, continuous surveillance systems, and specialized security services have become integral parts of a new wealth ecosystem. But what makes this even more fascinating is that physical walls are only the first line of defense. Behind them lies a far more sophisticated protective network, one that exists not in concrete or steel, but on legal documents. In the world of the ultra-wealthy, assets are rarely held directly. Instead, they are often placed within structures specifically designed to manage, protect, and transfer value over time. That is where specialized legal mechanisms begin to play their role, holding companies, trusts, estate planning structures, and multiple layers of ownership designed to separate valuable assets from personal or commercial risks. Among these, international trust structures established in Cyprus have attracted considerable attention from wealth advisors around the world, not because they exist outside the law, but precisely because they operate within internationally recognized legal frameworks and under the broader regulatory environment of the European Union. And that distinction matters. The old version of the offshore world often depended on secrecy. The new version depends on legitimacy, compliance, and long-term stability. In other words, modern wealth is not simply searching for a place to hide. It is searching for a place to endure. A place where assets can be protected against the uncertainties of an increasingly volatile world. But then an even larger shift began to emerge. Because the nature of wealth itself is changing. In the 20th century, wealth was often tied to tangible assets. Real estate, stocks, operating businesses, cash. Today, a growing share of global value exists in digital form. Technology companies, intellectual property, data networks, digital assets, and investment portfolios managed across multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. That transformation has given rise to an entirely new class of institutions, private family offices. Yet these are no longer organizations focused solely on property holdings or traditional stock portfolios. Their responsibilities have become far more complex. They are tasked with managing the transition between two different eras: the offshore wealth structures of the 20th century and the digital asset economy of the 21st. They oversee technology investments, venture capital allocations, intellectual property holdings, emerging digital assets, and strategies designed to preserve wealth for future generations. That is why, behind the luxury marinas and gleaming waterfront towers, there is a story far larger than wealth itself. It is a story about how wealth is being restructured, quietly, sophisticatedly, and increasingly through technology. Because the most valuable assets of the next generation are no longer locked inside vaults. They are not stored in gold reserves. They are not even contained within skyscrapers. They exist as code, as algorithms, as data, as intellectual property, as digital networks connecting continents in real time. And protecting those assets requires an entirely different kind of fortress, one built not from stone, but from servers, legal frameworks, fiber optic cables, and digital infrastructure. Which leads to the most important question of all. If Cyprus has successfully positioned itself at the intersection of wealth, technology, and data, what happens when the world's most powerful governments begin paying attention to the same strategic crossroads? Because whenever money and information converge in one place, geopolitics is never far behind. It exists as data. And when wealth becomes data, the next question becomes far more unsettling. What happens when the very systems built to protect that wealth become targets in the power struggles of the 21st century? Because no fortress is built without a cost, and Cyprus is no exception. For years, international capital, technology companies, and ultra-high net worth individuals have continued flowing toward the island. Money seemed to be everywhere. New towers rose from the coastline. Marinas expanded. Data centers continued to multiply. On the surface, it looked like a story of prosperity. But beneath that success, cracks began to emerge. When billions of dollars from around the world pour into a small nation, property prices do not rise gradually. They rise in waves of capital. For international investors, a luxury apartment on the Mediterranean coast may represent only a small position within a global portfolio. But for local residents, it represents something entirely different. A home, a family, a future. And when housing prices begin rising faster than incomes, an uncomfortable question inevitably follows. Is Cyprus becoming wealthier, or simply becoming more expensive? Yet the greatest pressure may not come from real estate. It may come from politics. Because the entire success model of Cyprus has been built around a simple principle: attract what others cannot: capital, data, talent, and globally mobile wealth. But as more countries grow concerned about tax competition and cross-border profit flows, debates across Europe have become increasingly intense. Governments want to reduce disparities between tax systems. They want to limit the movement of profits from one jurisdiction to another. They want to create a more uniform playing field across the common market. And that raises a critical question. If Cyprus gradually loses some of its financial advantages, can it still maintain its unique appeal? Or does the entire model begin to lose one of its most important foundations? This is where the story becomes truly fascinating. Because the world may be looking at the wrong asset. Tax policy was never Cyprus's most valuable resource. Data is. Connectivity is. Geography is. And above all else, adaptability. Throughout history, small nations survived through natural resources, or military power, or strategic trade routes. But the 21st century is creating an entirely different path. A country may possess no oil fields, no vast domestic market, no powerful military, yet still become strategically important to the global economy. Not because of what lies beneath its soil, but because of what flows through it. Information, capital, digital infrastructure, and networks connecting continents together. That may ultimately be Cyprus's greatest advantage. The island is not attempting to compete with economic giants. It is positioning itself between them, serving as a bridge between Europe and the Middle East, between regulation and innovation, between physical wealth and digital wealth, between the old economy and the emerging one. And that may explain why Cyprus continues attracting attention despite growing political scrutiny and increasing international competition. Because the island is no longer selling sunshine. It is selling access. Access to markets. Access to talent. Access to infrastructure. Access to one of the most connected crossroads of the modern world. And in an era where data moves faster than ships, where algorithms generate fortunes, and where digital assets increasingly rival physical ones, that position may prove more valuable than many people realize. Which brings us back to the question we started with. Is Cyprus merely a Mediterranean island that successfully reinvented itself? Or is it something far more significant? A preview of what successful small nations may look like in the digital age. A place where wealth is measured not only by money, but by connectivity, by information, and by the ability to adapt faster than the rest of the world. Because in the 21st century, the most powerful fortresses are no longer built from stone walls. They are built from data, and few places illustrate that transformation more clearly than Cyprus. Yet a nation can still become a critical node in the global economy if it can control three things: data, connectivity, and trust. That is the experiment Cyprus is conducting in full view of the world, not only for itself, but for every small nation searching for its place in a rapidly changing economic order. Because in the future, competition between countries may no longer revolve around territory alone. It may revolve around who becomes the safest refuge for data, who becomes the most trusted gateway for global capital, and who can persuade the world's brightest minds to stay. Cyprus may be just a small island in the Mediterranean, but what is happening here reflects a much larger transformation, a shift from the physical economy to the digital economy, from tangible assets to data-driven assets, from the tax havens of the last century to the digital fortresses of the next. And perhaps that is the greatest secret of Cyprus. Not that the island is hiding the world's money, but that it is revealing what the future of global power may actually look like, before the rest of the world fully realizes it. Thank you for joining us on today's journey. If you enjoy stories about power, wealth, technology, and the hidden forces shaping our world behind the scenes, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future episodes. Every week, we'll continue exploring the nations, corporations, technologies, and little-known realities that are quietly transforming the modern world. And who knows, the next story may be even more astonishing than what we've discovered here in Cyprus. Until next time, thank you for watching, and never stop being curious about the world around you.